say, where'd Chris go? He's such a slippery guy.
Updated on the
Okay, we're finally doing it. Great. You were late, I was late, we're all late. Everybody's happy. It's good. So MicroFi has been a topic of discussion for a lot of CCG. I mean, it's kind of this underground mycelial pops up everywhere. Later.
It's an underground movement.
It's an underground movement, exactly. MicroFi stands for mycelial finance or mycological finance. Basically looking at the patterns of mycology and nature in general. What are these time-tested, evolutionarily successful strategies that make mushrooms as prevalent and important to ecosystemic health as they are today? So Psilo-cybernetics is a play on words. Psilocybin is one of the compounds derived by mushrooms. Yeah, they create it. They're little alchemical wizards. And this is a kind of miracle substance. We'll get into it a bit later. Cybernetics, as a lot of you probably know, comes from the Greek root Kubernetes. It's about steering complexity, basically. How do we drive society or even a corporation when they don't have a steering wheel? And Psilo-cybernetics, putting them together, is discussing the emergence of institutional neuroplasticity. When psilocybin interacts with the human brain, for example, neurons regrow connections. So we can get out of patterns, we get sort of more healthy, interconnected brains. So how can we use MicroFi principles and tools to increase the neuroplasticity of cybernetic organizations? So CCG, MicroFi came about at the CoFi conference, Collaborative Finance, here 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Two. It ended up becoming a book in the Green Code Network, Kevin Owaki, we wrote Exploring MicroFi. There will be subsequent copies. Scott also just finished in a similar vein, Regenerative Pathways, or Pathways to Regeneration. There's a bunch of stuff up here, actually. Maybe I'll move the table a bit closer so people can check it out during the talk. The cool thing about the MicroFi movement is it's been so emergent in its energy. Like, people have just been coming out of the woodworks offering stuff. We had a designer make some really amazing stickers. We had this beautiful book. We've got microzines, we've got microcivics, we've got, anyway, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but it's a very emergent, wonderful ecosystem of energy and collaboration, and I think this is a really good place to play, be silly with some of these tools, examine these tools through the lens of natural principles, and see how we can, improve our human systems to act more like nature, which is much more resilient and sustainable long term. So we just talked about this. Psilocybin induces neurogenesis. This is when our neurons regrow. Cybernetics is a sense of collective steering. Psilo-cybernetics is responsive and emergent institutional design using MicroFi tech. So we don't need perfect systems, we just need more dynamic adaptive systems, because then they can just adjust over time. So why psilocybin? I mean, again, we just went through this, but I thought the root was kind of neat. It's the manifestation of the human soul or mind. So psychedelia is the manifestation of the self in terms of its root definition. And indeed, we evolved from fungi. We split off the tree at some point in evolution, where mushrooms decided that they would put we put food in our body as mammals, and mushrooms put their body in the food. And it's really interesting because when you break down, when you invert it like that, you leave all of the stuff that you don't take. They take what they do and they distribute it through the network, but what they leave is also useful for all the other organisms. So why cybernetics? Cybernetics is, the worst method for managing complex systems except for every other way. This is a quote from our CEO at Block Science, Dr. Zargham, which is a play on, I forget who said that about democracy, Churchill, but democracy or whatever. It comes from the Greek Kubernetes, we already said about this. So Block Science does a lot of work in engineering, research, and design. So I've shared a couple of articles in the channels already, but we've been doing a lot of sort of organizational cybernetics as our client work, but we also have been applying those tools to examine our own organization. So this is a block diagram of high levels of engineering process, but this is what we follow with a lot of our clients in designing mechanisms for these types of, not specifically this, this is my play on it through a mycological lens, so it's probably a lot sillier than Block Science would talk about it. But if you want to check out more, there's a big article about Block Science as a cybernetic organization, how we use viable systems model from Stafford Beer to break up the basically functional units and steering units over those functional units, etc., into not hierarchical but functional units within our own org. because essentially, what we want to go towards is cyborgs or cyborgs. We can create these, not even autopoietic systems. Has anybody not heard of the term autopoiesis? Should I?
What?
Autopoiesis? It's kind of a, oh crap, does anyone have a short definition for autopoiesis?
Well, it's self-generation, but in the sense of poiesis, which is Greek word for arts, so a thinking, generating out of nothing kind of basis. There is also the concept of synpoiesis, which is an update of the autopoiesis, questioning the auto.
Right,
How,
I think
how something generates in a context from everything.
maybe like self-steering, generation of a direction and motion, for
Yeah.
example. So a lot of people talk about autopoiesis like DAOs are autopoietic. They are like that's the autonomous, the autopoiesis. But actually we had this discussion last year that actually this is kind of insufficient because that is ignoring the relation of what you're moving relative to. There is no fitness objectively, there is co-fitness in context. So you take a window, you say this is our context, cool, we are tigers on earth in a jungle, now we can share an objective reality, like if I move this fast I'll catch you, but if we change that, so ultimately moving away from this idea of focusing on the individual, I am fit or I am not, to focusing on the sympoiesis. How do I move throughout my environment? How is my environment suited to different biological needs, but also economic, democratic, etc. infrastructure?
I have a question. So,
Yeah.
by boards, do you mean here blockchain organizations? The term that
Sure.
was coined by
Sounds great.
Gabriel Shapiro
It's a great idea.
instead of DAOs?
But I mean, blockchain is a material that is useful in construction, but it is not the only material that we have to construct systems. And actually we need diversity and resilience and a lot of other things, some of which blockchains offer really good affordances for, and we can use them there, but we can also use post-blockchain ledgers, we can use Excel sheets or Airtable, or there's all sorts of different systems that can be integrated. Okay, so what's missing in our current systems? In representative democracy, our current world, which is actually kind of electoral aristocracy, there's no representation and there's no democracy. There's no proportionality of representation. So if you get in, you get elected by the skin of your teeth, and someone else got elected on taking their whole riding, you both get one vote at council. This one person, one vote is like a information reduction mechanism that they've passed off as democracy. Because the alternative is racist. That's the only other thing that people think. Then if you propose something other than one person, one vote, they're like, oh, how dare you give some people as a vote? It's like, what in the world, what of anything should everyone weigh on equally? That's not how the world works, like if at my house, like the people who know more weigh in more, or the people who, there's just always a distribution. And I don't think there's any decision that we need. And I mean, if we want to, sure, we can. But it's a very low fidelity signal, and I think we can go much higher and giving delegates the proportion of trust that they have in the network when they speak. And that makes voting actually worthwhile for them because they have an influence over the vote. And we can all see that because it's visual. We'll get more into that later.
Oversimplified populism.
What is it?
Oversimplifying populism.
What is it?
The one vote, one person, one vote.
Yes, yeah. Intensity of preference, this is a lot of the discussion in quadratic voting. When we can only say yes or no, we can't say how much we like or how much we dislike, and you lose a lot of information there. Dynamic response, we live in a 2-bit democracy with a 4-year baud rate. Like, this is horrendous. It can't upgrade itself. So this is all terrible, and this is the Nyquist-Shannon sampling law. Kind of random mathematical tangent. Says if you don't sample a signal often enough, you don't pick up a good reading of that signal. You might come out with a totally wrong signal. And if we hold elections once every 4 years, and that election is based on what happened in the previous 3 months, then you can get away with a lot for 3 years and 9 months that just get swept under the rug in the latest scandal. So ultimately, we need to move away from representative democracy towards something like myceliocracy. I don't think that's going to catch on, but it was a fun word. Representative democracy is ossified, like a lot of the problems in our society. We talked about ossification and scale. Delegated voting systems could maintain proportionality of opinions. They could also allow us to express intensity of preference. We could also signal these things continuously rather than once every 4 years. So I'll run through, I have a bunch of slides. We can take as long as we want with them, but I won't go through every detail in these. This was an early systems diagram that Michael Zarden put together from block science of the common stack. Actually, an output of the common stack. The common stack was kind of a smart contract factory launcher, or at least it was intended to be, where these things would pop out like babies. So you'd have a cyber-physical commons of some kind, where you have an outside economy, you have an inside economy, you have the bonding curve here where tokens are bought and the escrow is held, you have conviction voting here where proposals gain in strength until they trigger and funds go from each of these proposals into out here, material outputs, so stuff is produced, people use it, people find value, they buy into the pool, etc. So this is just kind of a DAO, a system diagram of a purpose-driven economy group. Where did I go? There we go. Okay, so maybe more accurately, this is like breathing. This is the breath. The lungs is the expanding and contracting economy. The stomach is the generative. It's generating energy output shit that you plant. You get seedlings. You sell those seedlings. And this is just bringing a mycological or biological analogy to these organizations as organisms. They have, internal subfunctions that all work together, and how we match that, determines their effectiveness and their ability to meet the emerging complexity of their environment. I don't think I'm going to go through this right now, but if anyone's interested in Eleanor Ostrom and her quadrant, it's, there are assets basically in each of these quadrants that is kind of like creating a little game, a little flow, where things like private goods, which are kind of like the least good of this quadrant, are translated into public goods, which are like the most good of this quadrant. So it's almost like a gradient here, where you're just pulling private goods into public goods and creating a better world for everyone. In the same way that the mushrooms do their metabolism of the planet. So microorganizations, this isn't just corporate tools. I think the corporate form is extremely limited and also, far too dominant. So how can we lower the barrier, lower the bar to coordination on economic, democratic, and legal realms for communities or purpose-driven groups that don't have huge budgets for compliance and legal and issuing an equity for access to global markets or bonds, etc. So my communities could be basically a way that individuals with tactical autonomy, as we talked about yesterday, they decide how stuff gets done. Decide collectively where you have strategic autonomy, you decide what needs to get done. Individuals decide how. We are sensing in common. We are then deciding collectively, and then we're distributing resources for action. Just like mycelium, we're creating these new pathways for sensing, cohering, and cool. Like we talked about yesterday with autonomy, and I won't go through these. This is just linking to a bunch of other things. We can talk about it more, but I don't want to take all your time at the end of the day. Autonomy can be split up into like autonomy from and autonomy to. There's individual autonomy, there's collective autonomy, there's tactical autonomy, there's strategic autonomy. Our suggestion in this blog is kind of what we just talked about, collective, strategic, individual, tactical. Going further in this community as microorganisms, we have sort of different systems, and we think about the dynamic credit supply and expansion. This is like the breathing of an organism. We have its responsive governance feedback loops. This is like a nervous system. This could be delegated voting. That distribution of trust is like a trust pooling in your network. That's like a stable vector for your community to rely on those people who have that decision-making ability. Circulatory systems, how do we get funds around? Immune systems, digestive systems. Oops, sorry, that was conviction voting, my bad. Anyway. Lots of more rabbit holes we could dive down. I won't go into all of them right now. There are lots of pretty pictures. Bonding curves are neat. They basically kind of emulate the cell wall. I read a paper one time that the cell wall was the origination of life, because as soon as you have an inside and an outside, you have something different, right? And I think bonding curves are the economic equivalent of the cell wall, because they're a diffusion membrane where value goes from one system into the other by algorithmic constraint.
Good for you and everything. I thought it was.
And it's in
We
line.
never got the final price point things for it. There was missing a bit of data, but we could shoot that up. Alright, sorry.
Conviction voting mimics neural signaling. It was funny actually when I found, well, it's not that similar, but basically like a bunch of signals are feeding into an aggregator and then leading to an output. I use the capacitor symbol here because it's quite similar. So basically in conviction voting, you can cast your vote at any time. You're like a tap. All of the proposals on the table are like cups, and you can pour according to the proportion into each cup. So you can say 50% here, 30% here, and it flows over time, it charges up. And when you hit the threshold, the aggregate threshold, so everyone can weigh in, and it grows over time or shrinks. The cups have a hole in the bottom, so they decay reference over time as well, just smoothing out the signal, so you don't have instant voting. It charges up. You kind of get this momentum or aggregate conviction effect. Similar to the way neurons fire. So this is how distributed sense making happens in the brain. There's no head neuron routing neurons. Neurons fire, other neurons fire, other neurons fire. They charge up their action potential. So this is kind of mimicking that distributed. These are now collectives of people instead of collectives of neurons doing this type of stuff. Circulatory flows, how do we get funds in and then tap it out and route it around the network smoothly? I see we have tons of examples for us, and there's some really interesting tools that are being built. This was from Inverter Protocol. There's also Allo, and I mean a number of other, but ultimately, smart contract rails, substrate for this kind of economic activity on top of the informational and governance flows, I think can bring, high resolution, dynamic, adaptive democracy. Cumulative trust delegation is kind of like the immunity system of the community. You have like big trust centers where people have the broad support of people in the policies they're making. And this can serve as a signal and even a way to complement, not replace, the in-person, face-to-face discussions, but to emergently source it in real time, like visual ways. This was a term I think Pablo taught me last year, psychedelics. Is that correct?
That was me, or perhaps
Was it
it
you?
came out here.
Where did it come from? I don't know. I think this is the viewing of cycles or flows. So what I mean, like when we're doing this visually, like I would love to go into a DAO and just see all of the aggregate input-output flows, and then you can zoom in and see subunit flows, and zoom in even further and see project flows or task flows, and being able to interact with these and see where the funds are going, where the issues are. I think this will increase our ability to make good decisions as collectives, because we have more data over our governance parameters. We can even do computer-aided governance, where we're running these types of parameters into models that we're running as digital twins beside our policy systems, so we can test the effects of policy changes on systemic outcomes, at least in aggregate, so that we know what might happen, what to protect against, but also what we should or shouldn't do with policy, like taking tariffs from 10% to 140% overnight. Like, this is not a smooth decision. This was a quick critique from last time. Bill mentioned, and actually we've talked about this a lot. Within the bounds of reality, within the bounds of anything, you can be objective. If you say, we agree on the boundaries of this thing, within that thing, you can say, we are now being objective relative to the context of this boundary that we've drawn. Maybe it's that we live on the planet Earth and we all know what tigers are, but if you go to the middle of the sun, all of those assumptions don't matter. So like your context is really important in the bounds of your model. So there's nothing saying this is all right. This is saying there are patterns in nature, and I think even better than like biomimetic is bioprincipic design, because we're taking the principles and applying them where it makes sense. We're not just miming like, uneducated monkeys. So, what else is here? That's good. Nature signal processing tools, I mean, these things exist in nature all over the place, things that charge up and discharge, whether electrically, with mass, with water, and we're just saying, hey, let's do the same thing as like a hydro mill, but with, or a hydro plant, a dam. You put a little generator on it, and when the water goes through, you generate electricity. Cool, let's put a little generator on our money stream. And then let's feed that money that it generates back into our common pool. Fees! So good.
Love those fees.
But communal fees, right? All of the costs, all of the extractive costs of the financial system, and it's significant, can now be basically component by component endogenized into organization as organism. Viscosity, so it's interesting to think of like liquid democracy, but I think there are problems with liquidity as well. We talk a lot about liquidity. in the Web3 space, but not many people are talking about like viscosity, how slow or how fast, because you can have flash floods of liquidity. And that happens, and it's devastating for token market dynamics. So being able to slow things down or have a knob that allows you to change how quickly things can move. Maybe things like the Constitution should only change every 10 years, but things like, the law can change every year, and things that like, we need to eat dinner tonight can be made in an hour. So we now have like a tuning how quickly or how slowly things should charge up or discharge all around the system.
It's viscosity, but also kind of almost something you could call dam systems, which is not necessarily so micro, but it fits with the topic. To make an example, there's an interesting kind of pattern in board games when they do something like a token voting thing, like points, but tokens or even money is kind of a point system. So quite many of them, to have a designable space, they want to limit the kind of constant fluctuations of tokens, and how they often do it is you might define the people coming in with how much tokens they hold, but then you kind of set it down, and then you put another distribution in, which is like, oh, this person has 1,000 tokens, oh, that becomes 10. And this person has 300 tokens, that becomes 5, and so on. It is some, and you can design that other distribution, first of all, to be less volatile, just by the distribution. You can set all kinds of balances. But most of all, you can actually affect the decision space to be more predictable while still having money. And that's kind of a down system. And it's, I don't think it's an accident that many smart board games are able to work kind of token voting with that. But I've rarely seen anybody just letting it through in a DAO style manner, because it just doesn't make good designs. It's too out there, too volatile.
And some of these mechanisms are actually kind of like economic lift blocks. When you're, this is the problem of a lot of community currencies, is they tried to connect like raw dog to the global economy. Like you're gonna get destroyed, and that's what happens. But if you build an appropriate adapter, because like if you're trying to build a little puddle by the shore and you just dig a straight channel to a raging river, it's gonna but if we put a lift block and say some water can come in, some water can go out, but according to a managed schedule, that's essentially what some of these tools do. And a correlation like this, coming back to endosymbiotic finance, I didn't mention that. Endosymbiosis was when the mitochondria entered into the cell. This was like a historical event, far long time ago, and the mitochondria is the energy center of the cell. Prior to that, it was an energy-producing bacteria that was always vulnerable, and the cell was this like really sad, hungry thing that had to find food all the time. They teamed it up, and that became the viable building block for all life as we know it. So when the ability to power and self-steer yourself comes into the organization, then we get life in all of its forms, and all life shares that pattern, I believe. So our organizations today, much like our centralized financial system, we have huge power systems way out in the country, far away, and then we ship those things at long distances with heavy losses, and we don't adequately serve the people on the ground. Similarly with our banking system, we have banks with all this money. They can issue you $500,000 right now because you look like a good person and you want a house. They can just make that money out of nowhere. But us, we don't have that power. It has to be sent to us across these like long, lossy lines. We don't get very good access to it. We actually have to pay a lot to it. Not everyone has. Most people don't have enough of it. So what if we switch from the centralized model to the internal model of energy? Because when cells are able to produce their own energy, they're able to self-regulate. You have the mitochondria producing energy. You have all of these. Everyone is taking their own, reacting to their own environment, even within an organization. That can be as amorphous as you like. It can be a string of DAOs or DAOs and meta-DAOs or a corporation with departments or anything like that. So I think we can also use these tools for managed degrowth. In capitalism, we have a problem where stuff just grows until it explodes, and that's the strategy. You have to keep it growing because otherwise it'll explode. But these tools, bonding curves are these escrow mechanisms that expand on the way up, but they also contract on the way down. And they give manageable, predictable decline that doesn't resolve in like market panic and correlated failure of financial institutions. Because as we saw in 2008, actually all of the correlated financial risk in the financial sector is horrendous. And I mean, that's why a lot of regulation exists, and we shouldn't ignore that. We should encode that and go beyond it, because a lot of that is also oppressive directly, economically, globally. So, so I think these are tools for a lot of things, for growing new economies, but also shrinking old economies or shrinking new ones. All these things need to be alive. Organizations shouldn't be dead and ossified. And I think that's what we have, is a bunch of legacy institutions that are now roaming the earth and sucking up as much power and wealth and resources as they can, because they know the future is going to be crazy. And if that is the way we all act, the future is going to be crazy. But if we can shift that dynamic, and I think there's some really interesting ways we can do that by reversing the hoarding and increasing the flows. Maybe we don't need a house as a retirement nest egg, and we can just trust our flow of income and not need to hoard millions of dollars for years in the future. Anyway, one example. Aligning human and natural systems. So the great thing about all of these tools, like I was talking about outside, I believe they can be made in ways that are fractally coherent. So when they work at different scales, and they apply the same principles at every scale. So they're like scale free, and this is how nature works as well. So like if you watch like a fern unfurl, or like the symmetry in leaves, this is all pattern encoded in a seed that allows that beautiful complexity to come out of such simple things. And that's a very effective design pattern. This is what Bucky Fuller was all about, Buckminster Fuller, and I think these principles can allow us to, we don't have to design this. This isn't us saying, oh, here's your system. It's allowing people to take these tools and grow and emerge their communities in the way that makes sense. Coming back to the conversation of, we don't want to be saviors with this stuff, saying, oh, here's stuff that will save you. It's like, no, here's new tools that you can use to do stuff that's important to you. And what is that? We need to know, we need to make sure these tools, with that fractal consistency, I believe, eliminates a lot of the problems of the imperial colonialist stuff we were talking about outside. We're getting towards the end. The revolution will be mycelial, because it always has been. Every major revolution on the planet, like every turning point, every epoch, like the mycelium were first. Lichens were first to crawl out of the oceans and digest lava rock for millions or billions of years before algae split off and plants started to grow roots. We used to have 10-meter prototaxites, mushrooms that ruled the earth when dinosaurs were walking around. Today, mycelial networks connect with 90% of trees worldwide. Up to 25% of the sugars produced through photosynthesis travel through the mycelial network and trade with like Walrasian market dynamics, meaning like competitive markets. If one mycelium has more phosphorus than another, they'll trade at different rates with the tree. Toby Kears has been doing some interesting research on that, and with SPUN, Society for the Protection of Underground Networks. So let's use this stuff to compost capitalism, because it is, this legacy zombie system that has all of these resources stuck in it in various places. And I think, saprophytic mushrooms, what they do is they just look at that and see a feast. After a forest fire, the mushrooms are everywhere, like morels, because all the other organisms are not there. It's just a huge arbitrage opportunity for mushrooms to show up who are the fastest, grab as many of those resources as they can, route it through the network to somewhere else they can get a better price for it. But anyway, we can reuse these resources, we can unlock these resources and basically use that energy of capitalism, because mushrooms are also the bridge between death and new life. When we die, we're broken down by fungus. When we're broken down by fungus, those nutrients go back into the ecosystem, new life can come from that. So they're kind of this really interesting being that exists as like a doula for us as humans, and perhaps even as organizations, where we can bring in sort of the, in a loving and caring way as well, bring in the old world and hospice it into something new, because we need more dynamism, adaptivity to the myriad of crises that are coming at us faster and faster. If anyone's into, mycopunk came out as, between the solar punk, lunar punk debate. There was like, everyone was like, oh, what are you, solar or lunar, privacy or transparency? you know, solar punk future or runapunk dark fi? I was like, you know, I think actually I'm a mycopunk. And as soon as I said it, people were just like, oh, I'm totally a mycopunk. And I was like, yeah, actually, you can't even become a mycopunk. I think we all just already were. Oh, do I have that name here? No, I don't. Came up with some mycopunk principles. This was one of the first sort of like emergent things threw up on Gitbook. A lot of people were chatting about that. Yeah, so let's get anastomosing. This is anastomosis, by the way, and Haifa join and unjoin, and it's pretty interesting. Useful tools for sure. So we're going to give a talk tomorrow, making it up at this point, maybe it's the next day, on post-capitalism. This is a bunch of screenshots, GIFs from Orion's Twitter. You should definitely go check it out. He's Twitter famous, if you didn't know. This is some of the stuff that you will be able to do with tools that are built like here, like now. And I mean, even cooler stuff going on in folkjs.org. But you can see this is, so maybe I should explain this bit. Each of these is kind of like a mural. So I mean, we've got fluid dynamics and physics engines built into your mural. This is a whole bunch of functions that you can never build in Mural because it's, you know, closed software, but you could have, you know, stuff interacting, you can have counters, you can have buttons. We could plug a smart contract into that, so your signing is literally like a multiplexer with 3 inputs, and it's green, green, red, and, you know, Joe, Adam, and Sue. So you can click the button here, and it will push out to your smart contract, and then, you know, sign on your safe, so you don't have to navigate to multiple addresses, interact with wallets. You could just have, and all of this is programmed right on the front end. You can't really see it because it's so small, but all of those arrows, that's encoding all of the behavior of that. So this isn't some proprietary tool. This is something Orion was like, oh hey, what if we made shapes able to recognize where they are and what they're doing? And that came out kind of for free. There's a lot of stuff that these guys can tell us a lot more about, because this is the old stuff. There's so much more exciting stuff that can be done. But I mean, you know, this is Orion's browser extension that allows you to turn any website into a canvas and interact with the information on that. You know, portable DOM elements across pages. Then he made the canvas transparent and started interacting with it on his desktop. So this is the same canvas tool interacting between like 3 different apps. And again, nothing is on the back end saying these are these apps and this is how it works. This is just basically a system recognizing, oh, this is Obsidian, I should write in Markdown. This is a command terminal, I should write a bash command. And yeah, so some pretty fun and impressive technology coming up, and we get to play with it. So I threw up a board on jeffemmett.com/board/CCG25. Anybody wants to go there, you can scan this, and we'll all be basically on board at the same time. And Orion, I specifically need you there.
Wait, can you bring the cube back?
Oh yeah, sorry.
You specifically need?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or I guess I can drop this in the group. Because what we have there, I mean, a number of things. One, the transcripts that have been created the past few days, I've been dropping them here. So high level, we've got a frame per day. I can't even see it on. And then I guess I should do this so I can see what we've got. So this is our raw transcript from the morning session. Then I wrote this prompt here. So this works a little bit differently than a typical AI. The left box is your input, the right box is your output, and the arrow is your prompt. This is one way we can interact with AI. We can do a number of different things because this is such a multimodal tool. But this, you know, can you summarize this conversation in session titles and bullet about each presentation? And that's what it did for day 1. I think it was pretty good, but we can adjust if any titles, like sometimes it doesn't hear the right word or something, but I feel like on a quick run through, it got most of them. But of course, this is, like Ron was saying, don't consider this perfect, consider it 80%. Check it, double check it, but this can take, you know, a conversation. This was 5 minutes of talking or 10 minutes of talking that turns into something that you can work off of without having to take notes or, you know, even, well, I guess, record, we transcribed. Here's day 2, and I think, again, did a pretty good job. If anyone wants to double check and make fun of the AI for getting it wrong, I would be up for that. Day 3 I didn't record, but I got Rock's thing. So anyway, just trying to get these set up as like organizational areas. We can drop in notes. Actually, I'll be creating a Notion with Emil later, so we'll have a Notion page and we can organize that. But the great thing is we can embed a Notion right here. Because the cool thing about this tool is that you can add a lot of things in. I mean, the more corporate silo it is, the harder it is to access the data, and this is why I think they will be evolutionarily at a disadvantage as this type of computing advances and people realize the power and the both in like cost and capability. I think siloed systems will die off more so because this kind of composability will be so much more co-fit. Sorry?
Efficient.
Yeah. So some of the things that we built so far, actually, is this even working? Let's see. I broke the video chat. One of the first things we were doing while we were here, we were like, oh, why are we going to Zoom or Google Meet and then sharing screen to Miro where we can be in Miro? Why not just be in Miro and have the call right there? So we had an open source video app, which you can see here is going great. I will fix that in a moment. But we could have this call, we could have a call right in this canvas. And you don't need to share screen, you could maybe snap your video to the top left corner and then just move through the board together in your call, in your meeting. We could tie in a chat room, Slack channel. Why go to Slack? Why go to Telegram? You could have your chat, you could have it minimized on your left sidebar. We could embed, your calendar, or your Asana board, or your Trello, or, again, some of these are more finicky, especially with this current. This should be considered like alpha tech. This is kind of a generation behind what Orion and Chris have been working on with Folk.js, but that will basically be the back end for a lot of what I'm showing here. These are sort of proof of concept demos. It has all your typical tools, pen, sticky note, that kind of stuff, but then we started getting creative. We were like, well, why, or this is TL Draw, I should say. There's a lot of people building this. I'm picking up puzzle pieces and assembling them. No credit to me. There are brilliant people out there, and this is just my attempt to throw it together into tools that can be useful for me and perhaps other people. So if you want to create your own board, you can actually just change this slug, CCG. So you can, if you go to jeffemmett.com/board/anything, you now have a board that's yours. There's no permissioning at the moment, although we do have a login. So you can add your keys here, don't look at my keys. You can, actually I just added this feature as well, you now have a dashboard, so you can star boards now, save them on your account. This login uses public key, private key cryptography in the browser. It's a web crypto API. It was an interesting Web3 standard from like a long time ago, but it basically does sort of your key management in the browser, which I think means we could connect to a Web3 wallet without needing MetaMask or anything else. You could just show up on the board and get airdropped 100 tokens and then use those tokens to interact with things on the board, visually moving your tokens around. Almost like slot machine-esque, or like staking. Like we could have a treasure map with like staking pools, or maybe, we're here, we want to get there. On the way, we need this bucket of $5,000 to fill up, and this bucket of 50 hours of commitment labor filled up, and then we can go and build the rock climbing wall. And so we can start on that journey. You can click right on the bucket and it'll say, add your credit card or add your wallet. Put some stuff in there, start a stream, subscribe, and you start to see it fill up with like visual. I'm showing the worst thing here. Let's go to some fun. We're talking a lot. Orion plays this on. Here's a shared piano. Oh wait. Oh no. How long have you been playing?
Well.
Your output from the computer?
I was trying to use the HDMI.
I was just.
Yeah, there's a.
There you go.
You play?
Oh, also
It's not working for you?
Who's playing?
Oh, which piano are you on? Sorry, there's two pianos.
There's two pianos.
Oh,
Oh,
where are you? Do you use your one?
There. But on my
So
phone.
There's a right piano and there's a wrong piano.
delete the wrong piano.
I don't know where it is. It's wherever you are. So this is a shared piano, so we can play a tune together if we wanted to. Not that anyone wants to play a piano. Someone found it. It was there.
So how is this created? This piano?
The piano, this is just an embed. So this is a Chrome Music Lab, musiclab.chromeexperiments.com. Ryan and I were playing around and I was like, whoa, we can play piano together, we should have that on canvas. You don't have to rebuild it, you just embed it.
Yeah.
So you have like these windows onto a lot of the rest of the internet. Those windows can be surprisingly expressive, so you can have stuff, information passing through those windows, updating each other. Anyway, there's a lot more technical nuance to it. So I think, is that the last slide? Yeah, it is. Yeah, lots of cool stuff we could do. Feel free to play around both on the CCG canvas as well as your own. If you want to create one, there's a few glitches and issues with UX. I apologize, they irritate me too. And we will get this on better like wheels and infrastructure in the coming months. And I think there's a huge opportunity for this to not scale up to like hundreds of millions of users, but proliferate like nature does, as locally provisioned, locally stored data warehouses that, all of this could run on a server in here that we all connect just through a device-to-device torrent link or an audio signal or something like that. So we have opportunities to completely change sort of the security profile and paradigm of these tools that take them out of the like mass capitalism, corporate surveillance paradigm and into self-provisioned and very composable modular tools that are also really like HTML and stuff. I don't know, Orion comes over and he's like, yeah, we did this in 10 lines. I'm like, how could you do anything in 10 lines? But like some of these things it'll blow your mind. So lots of cool stuff to come. Mushrooms are great. Make sure you check out the table here. There's stickers, cards. Oh, we have micro zines. We didn't talk about those. There's so many micro innovations. My CE lead disseminate knowledge with low cost. Just take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. There's actually a template on the canvas. If you right click, you can create a template. You can make your own, make a little rip, fold it, and you have a booklet. So it's like a mini slide deck that you have, an intro, call to action, and QR codes, and then 6 slides to explain very simply to a general audience why they should give a shit about any of this. Because we're way too complex, we're way too technical, we talk about how instead of why, and the world needs this stuff and they need to know how to access it. So we need to get simpler in our messaging, we need to get more mimetic and viral, drive down costs, allow for photocopied information to get to people that need it. So come check it out and grab a Palestine bracelet if you like it. Free Palestine and have a good night.